group. Oh, let me start over. This is a very knowledgeable group. And so you'll probably know some of what we'll be talking about. But what we hoped was that we would fill in some gaps because so much has happened this year that I'm finding it hard to keep up. And the things just cascade in on my inbox. And it's very hard to keep up with everything that's going on. We haven't got a price on carbon yet, but we can still be thankful that there are many things that did happen this year. We will see, though, that there's still much to be done. And so this overview, I hope will help us figure out what we should be focusing on and where the good things are and where that we still need to work on. So Lisa is going to start us off. So Lisa, off you go.
Okay, off we go. So first thing I want to do is welcome everyone, and also welcome in particular to the Pottsville, Bloomsburg area folks who are joining our chapter tonight, as well as Susquehanna Valley folks. Thank you for being here. And if you have questions, just go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll have a discussion time at the end. But we're going to go through pretty briefly at a local level, and then state, and then international. And I will say at the local level, for those who are not in State College, maybe keep in mind that these might be ideas that you could carry into your own community, or if you need us to help connect some of our municipal local leaders with your local leaders, we'd be happy to make those connections if you want to take some of those, thoughts. So that way it can be a little bit relevant to you all as well, but we'll be brief on the local. So I'm going to share my screen and get us started here. Okay. So what's happening with climate change? And a lot of what I'm going to do is just talk about where to find more information. Like I said, we won't be going into, great detail, but we're doing State College to Glasgow. So, all right. Well, let's see, hang on. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I don't know what was happening there. So the first thing there's a lot of good things happening. And one good thing that has happened is that our Center Region Council of Government has approved a climate action and adaptation plan that was approved by the General Forum on November 22nd. So we now have an official plan. This is a picture of one of the websites called Center Sustains. Like I said, I'm going to give you resources. So centersustains.com is one of your resources that has some information on the local climate plan. This project actually got started with an emissions inventory in 2016 for the area. And then over the course of the last 2 years has gone through a step-by-step process of identifying how to put a plan in place. So we're just about at the implementation plan. Most of the information that you will be able to find is at the crcog.net climate action. That's Center Region Council of Governments.net climate action. And just to give you a very high level overview, when you get to that website, there are three levels of information here. On the left is an infographic, which is just a one-pager with a lot of pictures on a very high level of what this local plan is all about. And the middle is an executive summary that's about 11 pages long, and the full report is about 115 pages long. So depending upon what level of information you would like about this local plan, it's all there on that crcog.net/climate action. I just wanted to point out that you can be in for a little or in for a lot, depending upon how much you want to read about it. At a very high level, what was agreed upon by the General Forum, which consists of 6 local townships, is that we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 from a 2010 baseline. We'll make sure our neighborhoods and resources and economy are resilient to climate impacts. We're going to lead by example, ensuring transparency, fairness, and an economically responsible plan. So those are the 3 high-level goals of the overall plan. Like I said, it's been going on and been in process for about 2 years. And now just this past November, yay, it got approved. So now it'll be up to us, the individuals and the businesses and the community, to put the plan in action. The second thing I want to point out to you is also on the Center Region Council of Governments website is information on things that are happening with solar. So just very briefly, I'm going to click on that and point out that on that page, there's a list of solar installers by county for the whole state of Pennsylvania. I didn't even know that existed. So some of our folks that are with us today that are outside our county would be interested in this as well. And then the CPACE, I want to highlight it, is a program for businesses to help get renewable energy into their buildings, projects done that support clean energy in a very financially easy way, I guess, to get this done because it's paid back through taxes. So it's a very easy way. Low upfront cost is the key to that one. And so, and then the next thing I want to point out on this is the solar power purchase agreement. Right here, we have a working group of 15 entities in Center County, which are some of our local governments and authorities and our school district that have gotten together to do a power purchase agreement. And when you talk about trying to make big impacts in your community on climate, getting a group together like this where they can come together and buy the power off of a solar farm, that's what gets you utility scale solar. That's big projects, and that's where it really can make a big difference quickly. So anyway, those are some very exciting things going on. And then as well, Penn State in the last year and a half or so put in a 70 megawatt solar farm, which is going to cover 25% of their statewide electricity needs. So 70 megawatts is huge. And 25% of that university's electricity will be covered by their project. So a lot of great, exciting things are happening there. Okay, so now I'm going to get back to this. And then another exciting thing happening in this area is Solar United Neighbors. This is an organization that comes to different communities, and they currently are running a solar co-op in Center County, which is a temporary effort, a temporary co-op that comes together just to help select for financial reasons or other criteria that the group decides, help select and go through the process to facilitate solar for residential and commercial businesses. This Solar United Neighbors is in other states. They come to an area and they kind of have a concentrated effort. The deadline for Center County signups is the end of January. If they haven't come to a community near you, if you live outside the community, they may be, or maybe they've already come and gone, but they kind of come together and help the community select a solar provider and have economies of scale by coming together. So they're trying to get 100 signups by the end of January. They have about 77 or 78. There's no risk to join this co-op. They're not involved in the purchase or anything other than helping bring together the information. Your contract, if you should go forward with it, is actually with the solar developer. It's between you as an individual homeowner or a business owner and that solar developer. So the co-op kind of goes away after they've done everything to kind of pull people together and get people the right information. And then also Invinity and SunDirected are also good local options. But the one that was chosen for this co-op, their name is Sustainable Energy Systems, and they're based out of Maryland. So that's going on. And if you're interested in solar, there's no risk to join. You're just going to learn more. Whether you go forward is up to you. So I wanted to just point out those local initiatives. And then, that's Solar United Neighbors. There at the bottom is the website there if you're interested in that. Okay, that's everything for local. Let's move on to state. Dick?
Well, thank you, Lisa. The big thing that is going on with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which, as you can see, has the RGGI, and also it's called RGGI. So RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, it's all the same thing. Pennsylvania hopes to join this initiative early next year. In September, the Commonwealth's Independent Regulatory Review Commission voted narrowly to join. RGGI is a program involving 11 Northeast and Middle Atlantic states, and if Pennsylvania gets in, that'll be number 12. What it does is set a cap on the amount of carbon pollution that power plants may emit. And if they exceed that limit, then power plants have to buy permits from the state. The permit money is then reinvested in renewable energy projects. That's how it works generally and in most states. In Pennsylvania, specifically, 58 fossil fuel burning power plants are going to have to buy at auction a credit for each ton of carbon that they spew into the atmosphere. The average price of a credit right now is $13 per ton. The Department of Environmental Protection expects RGGI to raise $131 million annually at minimum. It would also cut carbon dioxide emissions by 227 million tons annually, and of course, lead to significant health benefits. Fossil fuel interests, as you can imagine, and their allies in the Republican-controlled state legislature are fighting hard against RGGI. They are working to pass a bill to forbid Pennsylvania's entry into RGGI because they allege that it is a tax and that only the legislature can authorize a tax. Governor Wolf will veto that bill, he says, if it reaches his desk. So entry into RGGI for Pennsylvania then seems to depend on whether the legislature can pass a bill that is veto-proof with a 2/3 majority. If they can't do that, then Pennsylvania is poised to enter RGGI. Then there was another matter. The Commonwealth's Attorney General had to review Governor Wolf's regulation and find it legal. That seems like a pro forma exercise, but some were worried that it was not because the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, who is running for governor, does not support RGGI. Why? Not really sure, perhaps out of personal conviction, or perhaps because some unions, such as the Boilermakers Union, don't support RGGI. And Mr. Shapiro needs union backing for his campaign. Well, just today, December 7th, it was reported that Mr. Shapiro's office has ruled RGGI regulation to be legal. So one more hurdle is overcome. Still, the state's entry into RGGI is being delayed due to what is being called a technical dispute between the Wolf administration and an agency of the legislature that circulates new laws and regulations. Are you following all this? It's not easy. I can go into this dispute, but it really is inside baseball, extremely complex. The bottom line, it's a delaying tactic to allow the legislature more time to pass the bill against Reggie that I mentioned earlier. And since Wolf will veto any such bill, and since the legislature has never once overturned a single one of Wolf's vetoes, it seems that this action will delay, but not prevent, Pennsylvania's entry into Reggie sometime next year. Now, there is one last recourse available to fossil fuel interests and their legislative allies, and that's the courts. Lawsuits are being threatened, but nothing has officially happened to this point. One other Reggie-related item. Pennsylvania is one of the few states, and I think many of you know this, where a clean environment is a constitutional right. It's in our state constitution. In July, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rejected a challenge to that right, which was related to Reggie. So that's all on Reggie. I hope you all took notes. There'll be a 10-point quiz at the end of this. I'm just kidding. There's no quiz, no quiz. A few other things are happening in the Pennsylvania legislature related to climate. One of them is Senate Bill 119. This would require legislative approval for imposing a carbon tax. House Bill 637 would do essentially the same thing. The Energy Efficiency Alliance of Pennsylvania and New Jersey calls these bills dangerous and overreaching and says they aim to prevent the state from regulating carbon emissions via any mechanism whatsoever, whether it's carbon trading plan like Reggie or a different policy tool. Also, on October 27, the Pennsylvania Senate approved a bill that would bar municipalities from adopting building codes that prohibit gas hookups. This was a Republican initiative with all 29 Senate Republicans voting in favor. They were joined by 6 Democrats. The bill passed 35-15. It is now being taken up by the State House of Representatives, and I'm frankly not sure where it stands there. Finally, well, not finally, almost finally, the state has a climate action plan to reduce production of greenhouse gases by 26% by 2025 and 80% by 2050. That's from 2005 levels. Just Google PA Climate Action Plan and you can find it if you want to explore that. This plan is heavy on recommendations and advice, very light on levers that the state can use to actually make it happen. Reggie, of course, would be the big new tool that the state may soon have at its disposal. And finally, I want to talk just a bit about forest carbon storage in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, as all of you know, literally means Penn's woods. And well over half the state, about 58%, remains covered by forests. 70% of those forests are privately owned. For years, forest landowners have sold their timber to loggers to earn money. Now the state is working with landowners to show them how to make money by preserving forest land through taking advantage of carbon offset markets. So that's happening. And the slide that you're looking at, our local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter, along with the Susquehanna Valley chapter, spearheaded a panel on forest carbon storage featuring the state forester, among other people. It was very well attended online. I think it is available. How is it available? Is that through YouTube?
Yes, it's on the Appalachian site for Citizens Climate Lobby.
Okay.
And
okay.
That's the address to the left.
There you are. If I had looked at that, I would have seen the words YouTube out there and would
But
have
if you
known
just
that.
if you just go to YouTube and put in exploring forest carbon, I think it'll come right up.
Each acre of forest land sequesters at least 2 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So it's important to preserve Pennsylvania's forests. And that's what's going on that we can talk about with the climate and with Pennsylvania. Next up is national level. And the first thing I'll talk a little bit about is the infrastructure bill, which was officially called the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That was signed into law in early November by President Biden. There are a few things in it that impact climate, although climate was not its primary purpose. This bill, $1 trillion bill, has in it $7.5 billion to install electric charging stations for motor vehicles. There is $2.3 billion in there for public transit, specifically low or zero emission buses, and $3.5 billion for research into capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's a challenging technological problem. For passenger and freight railroading, $66 billion is in the bill, and that's a good thing because rail is a very, very efficient way to move goods and people. Also for cleaning up Superfund pollution sites and plugging orphan oil and gas wells, $21 billion in this bill. And that's a good thing because it really helps to contain methane release. And we all know that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. There's also flood control, wildfire mitigation, and weatherization. $47.2 billion allocated to that in the bill. I suppose you can call that climate related, but this really only addresses the impact of climate change, not how to arrest it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's money that would have to be spent in any case. So that's the story on that bill that was just signed, the $1 trillion federal infrastructure bill.
Okay, so thank you, Lisa and Dick, and I'll pick up the story now. Let's go back, Lisa, to the reconciliation bill. The infrastructure bill that Dick talked about passed with bipartisan support. The reconciliation bill is not a bipartisan measure. The reconciliation bill is still not settled. And what exactly is a budget reconciliation bill? Well, every year the Congress passes a budget, and once a year they can revise that budget. Since they're merely revising a budget that has already been passed, the rule says that it can be passed by a majority in the Senate, and it's not subject to filibuster. So they only have to get 51 votes and not 60 to get it through the Senate. But the reconciliation bill must meet strict guidelines that are laid out by the parliamentarian. It must deal with budget matters. So lots of things that the Democrats want to get in this bill may ultimately be disallowed by the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian in the Senate is looking at the bill right now. Now, this is a huge bill. We're not going to look at the whole bill. We're just going to focus on the climate change provisions in the legislation. So as we said, Biden has pledged to have a goal of 50% reductions from 2005 levels by 2030. So this is the bill that he wants to, that is going to do the heavy lifting for that goal. On November the 19th, the House of Representatives passed the reconciliation bill based on a framework that President Biden had sent to them. And it includes $550 billion for programs to reduce greenhouse gases. So the biggest part of the reconciliation bill has to do with climate change. This is a huge amount of money. Nothing like this has ever been done in the United States. But this framework does not include what had been announced as the most important feature in meeting the goals. And that was something called the Clean Electricity Performance Program. And that would have rewarded power plants for meeting targets to switch to renewable fuels and punish them if they did not. Senator Manchin vetoed that proposal. What the bill does include is clean energy tax credits for electricity production and transportation, money for extreme weather and pollution, incentives for clean energy technology, and money for government to purchase new technologies. So it's mostly incentives. It's mostly money that we are spending in the government to incentivize the move to renewable energy, and for the government to help to do it as well. But this bill that has now passed the House will not get us to the goal of 50% reduction from 2005 levels by 2030. The hope is that the rest can be made up by state and local action and by regulations. Well, what Dick has just told us about Pennsylvania would make you wonder how much the states are going to step up to do their duty, but maybe they will. Even more troubling is that the regulations are under attack as well. The Supreme Court has agreed to review the powers that the Environmental Protection Agency has to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. These came from from a case called Massachusetts versus the EPA that was decided in 2007. And that case said that greenhouse gases could be regulated under the provisions of the Clean Air Act. And the Supreme Court is now going to review that decision. So regulation by the EPA may be a problem in the future, depending on what comes out from this Supreme Court decision. So for me, there are two lessons here at the national level. Of course, we want to get the reconciliation bill to have a price on carbon in it. But what I saw in this reconciliation bill seems to have been going on for a long time if you've been following the news. One is the importance of elections. The House kept arguing about what would be in this bill. They didn't want to vote on it until they were sure that it would pass in the Senate. But about a week after the elections for governors in Virginia and New Jersey, they all of a sudden passed it. And the reason was clear. The Democrats' poor results in those elections spurred them to act. They wanted to show that they were doing something. So elections matter. Political will matters. And that's one reason why Citizens Climate Lobby has to be a movement. We need to show that there are lots of people who are in favor of action on climate, and that if Congress acts on climate, we won't vote them out of office. They pay attention to elections. The second thing that lesson I took from this reconciliation bill is that it's very difficult for climate change to be solved by the government alone. Look how big this amount of money is, and it's still not enough to get to the goal. So we must incentivize private industry and include all of the private sector in working towards these goals. If companies can figure out how to make a profit by coming up with innovative ways to move to renewable energy, it will not cost taxpayers anything. They'll do it in order to make a profit. So that's one of the main reasons why Citizens Climate Lobby supports putting a fee on carbon. It will affect the entire economy, not just electricity production. And it will constantly send a price signal to everybody, businesses, government, and consumers, that they need to reduce their fossil fuel use. And businesses will go along if they can find a way to make money. And for those members of Congress who think the reconciliation bill is too big, carbon fee and dividend pays for itself, but it will not add to the US debt. So that's why we at Citizens Climate Lobby have been calling our Democratic senators and urging them to include a price on carbon in the bill that they are writing. We heard from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse that the Democratic members of the Senate Finance Committee, the people who are really tasked with writing this, are almost all in favor of a price on carbon. When he was in Glasgow, Senator Whitehouse said 49 Democratic senators would vote for a carbon price. Only Senator Manchin was opposed. Senator Schumer keeps issuing deadlines for them to come up with a final draft of legislation, but it keeps being delayed. Even though the House has passed the bill, remember that the Senate bill will be different. Once the Democratic senators can come to an agreement among themselves and it will pass in the Senate, then it still has to go back to the House for a final vote. And presumably that will be an automatic approval. It won't take much time there, but we still have a ways to go. I have some quotes for you from Janet Yellen. She's Biden's Treasury Secretary. And at the beginning of this year, in January of 2021, she said, "We cannot solve the climate crisis without effective carbon pricing." She also recently noted that the real cost of climate change would likely run to trillions of dollars. Well, let's stop a minute and think about how much a trillion means. I only very recently learned this, which I find astonishing. If you spent $1 million every day from the day Christ was born, you would not have spent $1 trillion yet today.
Wow.
$1 million a day from the time that Christ was born, you would still not have spent $1 trillion. So that's a lot of money. And so we cannot tax enough to make that much money. And here's another quote from Ms. Yellen. "I agree we all must do more, and the United States is stepping up." But she added, "The gap between what governments have and what the world needs is large, and the private sector needs to play a bigger role." So she recognizes the importance of more than just the governments. So this question of how we're going to pay for the changes that need to take place is one of the contentious issues on the international stage as well. How will we pay for this transition? How can poor countries afford to make changes to get off fossil fuels? Rich countries promised that they would create a fund of $100 billion a year to help poor countries. It was supposed to start in 2020, but they are behind, and poor countries are now asking for more money. They say this will not be enough because conditions have already gotten worse and they need even more. They are asking for money for losses and damages, that is, the unavoidable damages that are going to come no matter what precautions they take and no matter how much we try to mitigate climate change. They argue that rich countries put the carbon dioxide into the air and they should pay for the damage being caused. Naturally, rich countries are resisting that argument because it would be a bottomless pit. So let's turn now to what else is going on at the international level. And the big event for the year was Glasgow. And I want to tell you how we got to Glasgow. United Nations set up the IPCC, which means Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this consists of groups of scientists who issue reports. Each one has been more certain than the previous one that climate change is happening and that we must act as soon as possible. The latest report, the sixth, was issued in August of this year, and it was pretty dire. Scientists urged leaders to act as quickly as possible. Their conclusion was that it was only possible to avoid warming of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius if massive and immediate cuts in greenhouse gas emissions are made. The scientists are more hopeful that if we can cut global emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero by the middle of this century, we can halt and possibly reverse the rise in temperatures. And if you're wondering, that's where Biden's goals came from, of course, from this IPCC report. This was the first section of this latest report, and that was on science. There will be 2 more sections of this report coming out next year, and one will be on impacts and adaptation, and another one on mitigation of climate change. Okay, so the IPCC issues reports written by scientists. The decisions about what governments will do is the work of another body, and it's called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was created in 1992 at a meeting in Rio, and the parties to that convention agreed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The countries who are parties to that treaty have been meeting regularly. These are called COP, which stands for Conference of the Parties. And I'll come back to the last thing on our slide, nationally determined contributions. I'll come back to that in a minute. But let's look now at the list of COP meetings. So you can see that they began to meet as the Conference of the Parties, and they've been meeting regularly ever since. And so the Glasgow meeting this year is COP26. In the most important meetings I've highlighted in bold, and of course the key one for our purposes is 2015 COP21 that took place in Paris. And they had tried to come to agreement about what should be done, and there was all kinds of fights between the poor and the rich countries. So in Paris, they came up with something that cut through all the problems. They came up and instead of trying to tell people what everybody should do, they decided on a bottoms-up approach. Every country would in advance say what they were able to do. They would set their own goals depending on resources and political will. And these were called nationally determined contributions. So each country, it said at Paris, in the decision in Paris, each country would come up with its own goals. 196 countries agreed to the final text. This was an amazing thing that this many countries agreed to this. Very positive that this many countries were willing to cooperate. But the promises they made were short of what was needed to keep emissions below the stated goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade. And even those inadequate promises are not being met. But that wasn't the end of the story. This was a very hopeful development because this was not meant to be the end. They would continue to meet regularly and revise upward their commitments every 5 years. So Paris was in 2015, Glasgow was to be in 2020, but because of COVID, that meeting was postponed until 2021, and that's how we got Glasgow this year. So the International Energy Agency has stated that to meet the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, wealthy countries would have to replace virtually all coal, oil, and gas power plants with wind, solar, or nuclear by 2035. And by 2040, all of the world's remaining coal plants would have to be closed or fitted with technology to capture their carbon emissions and bury them underground. And this is what's called carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and sequestration. Okay, so those are the goals. How are we coming on these goals? Let's look at what happened at Glasgow. The Glasgow, the official dates were November 1st to November 12th, and they actually ended later than that. They didn't quite finish all the negotiations, and they ended later than the 12th. But the atmosphere at Glasgow was quite different from Paris. There was a sense of urgency that we really do need to do something, especially after that report in August from the IPCC. The conference, I think, is very hard to follow because so much goes on in these conferences. So many people are there, not just the official delegations from each country, but also observers, activist groups, reporters, NGOs. Tons of people come to these meetings. Almost 40,000 people registered for the official delegations, and that's not counting the unofficial ones. That was just the official ones. Not all of the official delegations were able to come because of COVID travel difficulties, but still over 30,000 official delegates were there. The 2-week period began with world leaders making speeches on Monday and Tuesday, but after they left, the real work of the conference began. In that first week, they made some important announcements. They announced that 100 countries pledged to end deforestation by 2030. More than 90 countries pledged to reduce global methane emissions to 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. But China, Russia, and India, among the world's biggest emitters, had not signed on to that agreement. A group of international banks and philanthropic foundations, including the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bezos Earth Fund, announced a $10.5 billion fund to help emerging economies make the switch from fossil fuels to renewable resources. Their aim is to raise $100 billion that can be used for investments. Also, a coalition of investors controlling 130 trillion in financial assets pledged to use that capital to help, that they would use that capital to hit net zero emissions targets in their investments by 2050. So they're saying, we've got all this money that we use for investments. We're not going to invest it in things unless they will really help to bring an end to fossil fuel emissions. This group is made up of 450 banks, insurers, and asset managers in 45 countries. Well, of course, this is totally voluntary. Will this work? Is it just greenwashing? It does show, though, that businesses are taking the threat seriously. And one thing that was announced that got a lot of attention was that 40 countries pledged to phase out coal. But, again, a big but, the 4 biggest users of coal did not sign: China, India, Australia, and the United States. And the assumption was that the United States didn't sign on because they didn't want to risk alienating Senator Manchin before he had signed on to the reconciliation bill. So there's hope that they might sign on later after the reconciliation bill is passed. So it's good news, though, because countries like Poland, who use a lot of coal, are signed on to this agreement. Some developing countries like Vietnam signed on, but what is not clear is exactly when they intend to stop using coal. And of course, the timing makes a big difference. It's also not worth very much if they just switch to natural gas, because natural gas produces greenhouse gases too. But it's nonetheless a big deal because globally, coal is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions. So getting this many countries to address that is a big deal. this is not enough to do away with coal. That was one of the goals of the conference that had been set by the UK, to do away with coal. Well, they didn't quite get there. Now, the United Kingdom is the host of this meeting in Glasgow, and they came up with this interesting scheme here that these partial agreements were announced in the first week to give impetus, to get the ball rolling, to make it look like something really was happening at Glasgow. These agreements, though, were all negotiated ahead of time and just then announced at the conference. They're not actually part of the official agenda. These are partial agreements among various countries. The COP runs not by partial proceedings, but rather by consensus. But it looked like lots of things were happening, and it spurred further development. So it's all good, but it doesn't get us to where we need to be, and it wasn't officially part of the COP proceedings. The official proceedings are much duller, and they operate by consensus. That means that the parties have to all agree. It's very hard to get anything ambitious agreed to if you have to have everybody on board. It's also complicated because in addition to the COP26, that is the signatories to the Rio Convention, there are also meetings of signatories of Tokyo and Paris, and all of these are different people signed those agreements. Around 150 countries arrived with revised nationally determined contributions. They upped those pledges. It's estimated that if all the promises are kept, we can stay in the neighborhood of global warming increase of 1.8 degrees by 2100. That's not the 1.5 they're aiming at. And of course, this assumes rapid action and technologies that do not yet exist to have carbon capture and storage. One of the things they're working on is a rule book. And before Glasgow, all of it had been completed except for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Article 6 provides for carbon markets, basically a worldwide cap and trade system like RGGI. But here, countries that have met their goals could sell the excess to other countries. So in other words, if you've already met your goals and you still have reduced your greenhouse gas emissions by a whole bunch more, someone else can buy those if they haven't been able to get to their goals. So there are lots of issues here. What are the reporting requirements? How do you ensure that the goals have been met? But this is important because it can encourage countries to take robust measures, knowing that they can sell the reductions that go beyond their stated goals to another country that's having trouble meeting their goals. Okay, so this doesn't sound very good, but in many ways, in that they didn't reach what we wanted, which was 1.5. But it's important to remember that the COP is a process. It's not just one-time thing. As important as the actual promises made this year is the rulemaking that we just talked about and the plan for future meetings. New this year was that they all came up with what was called the Glasgow Climate Pact, signed at the end of the meeting by consensus. Everybody signed on. In it, they decided to come back, not in 5 years, but next year, to upgrade their nationally determined contributions. They also, for the first time, mentioned fossil fuels. Hard to believe, right? In all of these agreements, they had never mentioned fossil fuels. The statement that they came up with was rather weak, but it does mention fossil fuels. It calls for a phase down of unabated coal. That means that coal that's not sequestered. So they calls for a phase down of unabated coal and a phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, not the fossil fuels, just the subsidies. But hey, we're making progress nonetheless. So can we say it was a success? In many ways, yes. It's hard to get that many countries to agree on something. Did it solve climate change? Not yet, but it's not over. And that's where we come in. What can we do to help push the process forward at all levels? Sorry, we went a little longer than we had hoped, but we can now turn to questions and answers and discussion. So you can unmute yourselves and see what you'd like to know, or comments or questions.
There are some questions in the chat or comments.
Oh, yes, Terry says he heard on the news today that Chuck Schumer was giving Senate Democrats until Christmas. Yeah, he keeps making deadlines, but they can't, but they don't keep meeting them. And Senator Manchin has made very clear that he doesn't intend to get this done by Christmas, that it will go into 2022. And Biden, I think, made one of the great points about it. He says, when you have a 50-50 split in the Senate, every senator has a veto. So it's really hard to get them all in agreement.
Sylvia and Dick, Joseph had a question. Are goals of 50% reductions of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2005 actually good enough to take us to a meaningful downward trajectory? Originally, the benchmark was 1990s emissions, which were lower than 2000s.
Yeah, but the aim ultimately is to get to net zero by 2050. And net zero means that you either have, you're not using greenhouse gases, or if you are capturing the emissions and sequestering them. That's what net zero means. It's net. It's not zero carbon by 2050. It's net zero by 2050. And so that's why I said that these goals assume that we're going to have the technology to make this possible. And that's why I sometimes get annoyed when people say we shouldn't be spending any money on carbon capture and sequestration. What matters is that we do away with fossil fuels, and that's just going to delay it. Well, we need to do that too. We have to do them both at the same time. Stop using fossil fuels, but we also have to find a way to get the fossil fuels out of the air.
Just a comment. Thank you, Lisa, Dick, and Sylvia. Excellent presentations. Thank you. Are there any countries that haven't signed on to the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal?
So the 1.5?
Yeah.
That was included in the Paris Agreement at the very last minute. The original goals were 2.0 degrees Celsius, but at the last minute, they got it into Paris. And so they're still sticking with that, although of course they haven't come up with enough to get there yet. And I said the nationally determined contributions are it said you'll get to 1.8 by the year 2100, but that actually assumes that you'll go past it and then come back down, because you figured out a technology to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I don't think I mentioned one of the things that's very good for CCL, and that is that there was a lot of attention paid to what's going on in Canada. Canada, with the wonderful support of the Citizens Climate Lobby chapters there, managed to get a price on carbon through its parliament. And it's been a really great success in Canada. And the amount they are paying now keeps going up. I did have it in front of me, but I don't find it now. But they're doing a really good job in Canada. And people are looking to Trudeau as a leader in helping other countries bring prices on carbon. And so the fact that Citizens Climate Lobby is also an international organization, that we're not just in the United States, I think is a really good thing, because I think we can help push a price on carbon throughout the world.
And Sylvia, wasn't Citizens Climate Lobby in Canada the primary, or maybe not the primary, but a big instrument in getting that carbon price approved up there?
Right. They were very important in doing that. Yeah. And Canada had a history of it in British Columbia. It's been used for a while, but they got it so that every province needed to come up with a carbon price of one kind or another. And in 4 provinces, let's see if I can come up with them: Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and I've lost the last one. The 4 provinces basically have the CCL, carbon fee and dividend, in them.
And Sylvia, wasn't that also stipulated as the default if the province didn't come up
Exactly.
with a plan? And I'm wondering also how, I mean, how long has that been being implemented?
I think this is the 4th year.
4th year
Now. Yeah.
Because don't they have, they must have some kind of impact on the especially the coal and natural gas with pipelines coming out of Canada. I think that would be important too.
Yeah. I don't know whether those have what. Let me urge you to look at, if you want to, the presentation last week's Citizens Climate University talked about what CCL did while their delegation, they had a large delegation in Glasgow. 33 people from around the world were there. And Kathy Orlando of Canada described what they've done in Canada. And it's more complicated. There's a special provision, which I don't understand, so I can't tell you about it, but there's something special for large businesses that produce a lot of emissions. But anyway, that she's began that description of that in this in Citizens Climate University, which is a Thursday night training that Citizens Climate has every week.
Thank you.
All I wanted to say, if I may, is it's a great thing from Canada, but there are 37 million. California alone is 39 million people. So if only we could have like even one state do that, though, that could be interesting.
Yeah. Well, California has its own cap and trade system as well, Joseph, like Reggie. So it's not a direct carbon tax like we advocate, but they do have a cap and trade system. And what it does is it makes the states around it who want to be in the same electric system impose better standards on their electricity production. So it does have a kind of a spillover effect because of that. But see, cap and trade and Reggie and in California, that's just about electricity production. It's not about the rest of the economy. And that's what makes the direct carbon tax fee and dividend so important. Another thing that makes the fee and dividend so important is that if you give the money back to the people, you can raise the taxes higher. And Kathy Orlando talked about that. And she said they made a mistake in Canada. They are giving the money back, but they had it as a rebate on your taxes. So people didn't notice they were getting it. Starting this year, is going to be a direct payment into your account. And so then that's going to help provide support for the policy. I'm happy to stay. It's sick. Mark is watching the time for me. My husband, Mark, is over here. And he's watching the time and tells me that it's after 6:30. I'm happy to stay on and talk about this further because obviously I care a lot about it. And we can give you, if you want to know more about any of these issues, we have some links that we can give you for them. And the other thing is, what can we do? What do you think? Let's talk about what we can do in the new year if you want to stay on and talk about this to help to push this forward. We can't talk anymore about what each individual can do. We've got to work together if this is going to be solved. So, any ideas about what you heard that was inspiring to you, or questions about it? We just lost now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me is your quote from Janet Yellen that said, government can't do all of this alone, and that we have to rely on, we have to use all of our resources. So it makes me think that we could all ask businesses more directly and specifically, what are they doing to be part of the solution and not part of the problem? And, that's a small thing that could, it's just like calling our senators and members of Congress, if we ask the people we do business with that we, need movement on this, these kinds of things.
That what you're saying is basically what Catherine Hayhoe told us in that presentation that Eric put together. You got to talk about it to everybody constantly, and so that it becomes a priority for everybody.
So I had one thought for quite some times, and it's from my experience of running my business here, is I'm renting from my landlord, and my landlord has multiple tenants all over the town. But our leases basically put all the onerous of repair or upkeep of the building upon the tenant. And projects such as lowering the cost of energy, reducing the energy usage, are absolutely entirely at the cost of the tenant, which means that a lot of things could be done to make things much more efficient, but the landlord does not put any money into that, and the tenant, if I go bankrupt next year, I will never recoup my money. And I'm not sure how the situation that seems intractable, I'm sure there must be some ways to make it work.
Joseph, just to show you that how in your case it's bad. It's even worse if you're poor. Because you pay huge energy bills on top of your rent, and the landlord has no incentive to even inspect the furnace. So there are lots of problems like that, and I wish I had a solution, but that's the kind of thing that they're going to have to be dealing with in the climate action and adaptation plan. So if you will talk about that with the members of the different townships, and say that this is a problem for them reaching the goals that they have set. Maybe they can come up with a way of solving it. The center region of governments has a rule that if you are renting, if you're a property owner and you're renting property, the furnace must be inspected. I don't remember the exact number of times, but anyway, once every 2 years, once every year, whatever it is. but that's only within the center region. Outside of the center region, in Center County, there is no such rule. And so poor people have furnaces that haven't been inspected for years and are inefficient and are costing them a ton of money and spewing lots of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. There are a lot of laws like that that can be changed to make the things more efficient.
Okay.
Lisa. Oh, sorry.
Eric?
I was really interested, Lisa, in the stuff you were saying earlier about like solar co-ops and regional solar plans and things like that. And one thing that I've wondered a lot about is there, I don't know if like a foundation or some kind of large organization out there that would provide funding or incentives for companies to put solar arrays on their parking lots. So like there's this big discussion in Columbia County about like some of the solar farms that are going up and people are upset about it because it wrecks their view, or it involves them like bulldozing fields, and there's like an environmental cost to putting solar panels out in the countryside, but there is no such cost to putting them up in the Walmart parking lot, and I've been to a few places like this where they have them up on these big, platforms. They're like 25, 30 feet off the ground, and they shade the parking lot and they protect people from rain and snow. And your car isn't like boiling when you come back out from the store in the summer, and they generate massive amounts of energy. And so like, it seems to me like there's a huge opportunity to generate renewable energy, specifically in parking lots, which are already environmentally destroyed and already ugly. And the solar panel actually can make them, better places. But the upfront cost is so huge that a lot of these places that have the grounds for it maybe aren't willing to make the upfront investment, even though it probably pays off, in a decade or two. And so I was wondering if I may have missed this, if you know of anything, like we could reach out to some places that have parking lots and say like, hey, why don't you put some solar panels on it? And here's, an option for you to pursue for the funding.
Yeah, the CPACE program I mentioned is specifically designed to help, companies, especially, your independent type companies, with that kind of low cost, low upfront or no upfront to do renewable energy or solar panels, and then they repay it over time, through their property taxes. So they could get a project going. That CPACE program, I'll send you some more information. I believe that the county or the area has to adopt something related to it first. So it has to kind of go through maybe your local municipality to make it available to all the businesses in your area. But that's one place I would start looking. If it's a big corporation like Walmart, you may be interested to go to a site called re100.com, which RE stands for renewableenergy.com. Some companies have already set their own renewable energy goals, and they've stated them. And I think Walmart might actually be on that list. So, that's another way to kind of, Walmart would have their own funds to kind of do this, but, if they've signed on or made a public statement like that through their own initiative, then that could be a way to maybe loop into something they've already stated they wanted to do, but they just haven't done it in your area, working through channels like that. But I'll send you some information on the CPACE to take a look at that, because that's a program I'm familiar with even from other states. And I know Center County has adopted it. And so that's one low cost way to do it. Now, if there's other kinds of loans, if it's an agricultural type business, there's REAP loans, Renewable Energy Program is what that stands for. So if it's an ag business, there's the USDA has some other programs that help with the financing, low cost financing.
Okay, thank you.
I know there's some states that have laws that are encourage like installing solar like in brownfields, like old coal mining sites, that kind of thing. I wonder if like parking lots would be similar to a brownfield.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, I know in California that a lot of municipalities, and I think it may even be at the state level now, they're mandating that new construction must have solar panels. And if you can't for one, because you have trees or something, then you have to build them someplace else or pay to build them someplace else. But that's, I got so excited when I heard this. It was some years ago. And I ran into Mike Pipe, the head of our county commissioners, and said, "Oh, why don't we do this? Why don't we pass this law in Center County?" And he said, "We're not allowed to." And so that gets back to what Dick was talking about, that they're making laws in Harrisburg that prevent us from solving this problem by saying that there are things that we can't do at the local level. So changing laws that stand in the way of solving this are really essential, because there's so many ways that this is being done. Zoning laws, even for solar panels. John, you were talking about brownfield, but Eric, what are the zoning laws for putting in solar panels on parking lots? Every municipality is going to have different laws. So if we could have something that was more general, it would cut down on the price, because then companies could develop a model, a template that they could bring to different areas and get things done. But in Pennsylvania, it's all over the lot.
Sure, everybody on this call is registered to vote. Yes. If not, call me. I'll get you a voter registration. Make sure your friends, neighbors, everybody you can. And that's one of the things we do need to address. Thank you, Sylvia, for mentioning that.
Yeah, we do need to change the laws. Speaking of voting, the League of Women Voters is having a special speaker this month, the local chapter here, the new elections officer for Center County. So that should be worth hearing. The elections officers are, speaking of voting, Nancy, are being attacked everywhere, and so we really should support the nonpartisan and efficient and professional way that elections are being conducted.
And I think that will be available both in person and on Zoom. I know for sure it's on Zoom. I'm not sure if in person, but it should be.
I think it's just Zoom.
Everyone's invited.
Yes.
Sylvia, I'll share my screen real fast on some things we can do. I know it's probably getting about time for people to go, but whoops, not that.
Didn't have that many slides, so you can get to it.
Here's a few things we can do in addition to some of the things we've already talked about. If you're in Center County, read the climate action report with an intent to act. Read it in an active mindset where you could pull out something that you could do. You could ask,
but maybe attend your township meetings too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, those are public meetings, by the way, that you can attend. Mondays, the Climate Action and Adaptation Committee meeting meets on what, Sylvia, do you recall the second Monday?
I think it's I'll look, see what it
First
is.
Monday.
We've been attending them, Lisa
Yeah,
and I.
So here's a few things you can do.
Second Monday.
Second Monday of the month. ask businesses what they're doing to make energy efficiency improvements. Join the solar co-op to learn more. There's no obligation there. Switch your retail electricity supply to 100% renewable through the papowerswitch.com website. And the number 5 and 6 are great. Tell your state legislators that you support RGGI, Pennsylvania's entry into RGGI, and that you oppose efforts to prevent Pennsylvania from regulating carbon emissions, which those are great ones at the state level. Thank you, Dick, for sharing those ideas. And then, of course, with CCL, we know how important it is to, call our senators, to email President Biden, to make our monthly calls about carbon pricing. You could ask a friend to join CCL with you, and you can just talk about it with your friends and neighbors. So there's 11 ideas right there.
Good. Okay.
That's all I have.
I think unless you, we of course, Dick and Lisa and I, and John also, as the regional coordinator for the Appalachian region for CCL, we are all available to talk anytime anybody wants to talk. What I'd love to do is talk about climate change. So give me a call anytime you have any question or any concern, and I'm happy to talk to you all. Okay, join us in January at our next monthly meeting. We're not going to meet on the 3rd Tuesday as we normally do.
Of December.
In December. We'll meet on the 3rd Tuesday in January. So we'll see you then, I hope. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.